Awesome. Welcome, Nadia and Eric.
Hey, Eric.
Hey, Nadia.
Thank you so much for making time. I feel like this is the topic that I love to talk about, but it's so nice to hear someone else's perspective on how they view it because I feel like if you want to start a fire on LinkedIn, this is the topic that you want to address.
Exactly. There's been quite a few posts about this topic I've seen. But no, I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're the right person to talk about it because you've been in the trenches and you help your clients with translating what it is that they're doing in the dark hours of the day behind their computer to the rest of the business who expect results but don't may not necessarily realize how much time goes into generating the work behind those results. So I will turn that over to you if you want to introduce yourself and just kind of take us through your way of thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, hey, everybody. So yeah, my name is Eric MacColl. I've been in the trenches, the last 15 years of my career. Really, I started out leading demand gen teams and marketing teams at startups like Scripted, Lyft, and then Atlassian for about 6 years. And a lot of that time is not only running campaigns and trying to figure out what works and testing things, but also like advocating for marketing and having to report to leadership and the CRO in weekly, monthly, quarterly QBR meetings, and really translating what you're doing. So I've been there before. Today, the last 3 years, I've been focused on advising and consulting companies, and really ranging from kind of Series A to Series C and beyond. But I'm really happy to kind of dive into this topic of attribution, but also just how do you advocate and communicate marketing's performance given its complexity. So, if you've seen various posts on LinkedIn, you might think attribution is pointless. You've seen things like it's BS, MQLs are broken. There's just, it's a lie to see all of these attribution tools or data points. And I think that I respect these point of views that they're trying to make. I think a good point that you can't just rely on numbers alone to make your decisions in marketing. There's no way to capture 100% of every single touch point or every single reason why somebody purchased your product. That is impossible. However, you need to understand, how people are buying your product and what that journey looks like. And I think attribution to me is super powerful in the fact that you know how to interpret the results in a way that helps you become a better marketer and help you tell that story going forward, not using it as an exact, science and saying this is 100% the credit that we deserve. So that's what we're going to try to talk about is, you know, just because it's tricky doesn't mean you have an excuse not to track performance. I think that when I go into organizations and I see what's going really well, or the ones that are doing a really, really good job, is that they have a really, really strong data foundation. They know how to talk about the performance of their marketing. And so my goal is to get everybody here on the same page of, hey, what can I track? What can I actually talk about? And then how do I talk about some of the tricky stuff as well? So the challenge with marketing leaders is that you have CFOs and leadership. They kind of expect, sometimes they expect a predictable formula. They want to know what do we put in and what do we get out of it. Um, I think that that narrative is starting to change as there's more education about the complexities of buying cycles and the importance of brand and the importance of combinations of brand and direct response. And so I think the goal as a marketing leader is to help finance and CROs and CEOs to have reduced uncertainty. So making them feel confident that their investment in marketing and your campaigns and your programs are yielding growth. And so that's one thing that's super important to think about. Don't worry about having a perfected model where you have to say an exact science, specific number. Just think about how to reduce uncertainty. And the best CMOs that I see, they are actually the best at internal marketing. And the CMOs that I see that are challenged and maybe have like organizations that have higher turnover in that role, they typically aren't as strong in internally marketing or advocating what marketing is doing well. And that is something that I think hopefully we can solve, because it is a communication skill, and understanding how to translate that in a way that makes sense, given its complexities, and there's just so much data out there today. um, we're going to get right to it. So things that, like, the way that I look about campaign performance, as I said, there's like easier things and there's harder things. There's no way to track every single touch point. It's impossible. There's going to be conversations about your brand. People are just going to talk about it potentially over coffee, on a Slack group, and potentially in an email thread. Hey, what do you recommend for X, Y, and Z? That just happens. That's the behind the scenes brand, dark, social funnel that you can't necessarily measure. Easy to measure stuff is things like direct response campaigns, and this is where I don't think you can get out of it. Like, you have to be really, really on top of understanding your direct response campaigns, and that is something that you can optimize and you can show specific ROI to. And so, if you can nail the right hand side of it, we can also talk about how to advocate for building up that left hand side of it. And so what that looks like is, on the left-hand side, for brand initiatives, understanding, what are our top of funnel motions, our brand building programs doing. You can do things like brand lift surveys. I remember when I was working at Lyft, if you're a larger brand, there's a lot of tools out there to measure brand sentiment, brand lift, like that. There's also holdout groups and A/B test groups that I like to do with smaller companies. Hey, let's go after this cohort of accounts, or these groups, or this region of a location, and let's test, doing these types of broader brand building exercises, like billboards, or display ads, and let's do a bunch of YouTube videos, and inviting them to podcasts and webinars, versus another group that's maybe not getting that treatment. You can see how there's a lift and a rise across all of the performance metrics, and so that's one way you can prove lift across the efforts of your brand initiatives. And then, of course, asking, how did you hear about us on forums? Maybe having a motion where sales is asking that on their calls. You can really start to kind of triangulate that data. So it's not impossible to measure brand. You absolutely can measure brand. You just can't measure specific touch points. On the right hand side, for direct response, I actually have a total cheat that you guys can download later, but it's basically, you need to get your UTMs in shape. You have hidden form fields on those forms to tag, when people are doing these actions, what they're doing. I love using, for my tech stack, I use typically HubSpot, Salesforce, Marketo, those types of programs. And so a Salesforce campaign member is a huge, important object when I think about reporting for my clients. And then, of course, touchpoint attribution software is great to add on, because what you're trying to do is, again, just have more visibility into those touch points that you might not be able to capture with a standard, marketing operations tool or CRM. And I think from a strategic perspective, again, harnessing this balance of brand versus direct response, I think, like, again, the way that I'm separating this out is actually a great way to communicate this if you are a marketing leader to your board and to your C-suite, is because you have to get them on the same page that not all marketing is the same. Not all marketing is direct response. Not all marketing is something where we can just turn it on and capture demos. There are things that you need to do in the market to ensure that your target, personas, your target accounts, understand and know what your brand is, and know what you stand for, and know what your perspective is. So those are activities that you absolutely need to do, but they aren't going to be something that, again, you just turn on and you see demos come through. On the right hand side, you need to ask yourself, well, what am I doing that I can actually, control that flux week to week, that I can actually turn the switches on or off. And that's also super important to communicate to your team, and both the sales team and to your leadership. And so I think this, combination of both together is something that I'm a huge advocate for, and that you need to really communicate. So before we get into that, I guess in summary, think about attribution for me is that it's not going to be a direct calculator. Definitely don't fight over credit. we used to always at Atlassian say one team, one dream. We had very good, closely aligned partnership with sales and marketing in terms of we're trying to reach this pipeline target together. We know that it's going to be a combination of inbound, outbound, combinations of warming up certain signals or accounts, and then having sales go after that. And just treat attribution as more evidence and showing that story of how that's happening and those patterns versus 100%. This is exactly what the credit is. But yeah, Nadia, does this resonate? How do you feel about this? Is this something you've kind of heard in your conversations as well?
I love the analogy of a compass because we actually have a client, a larger company. They're dealing with a lot of data, a lot of nuance, lots of time periods that they're tracking, different segments. And that's how they refer to attribution in general. And I think my comment as you were talking, and I love that, like this lack of trust that attribution will give you anything because you cannot track everything at 100%, which is true, right? I had a CRO once and he was very skeptical about the whole thing, right? He didn't know much, but he thought he was a marketing pro. And he said, "So explain this to me. I was on a plane, sitting next to this guy. I started talking to him, and turns out he works for a prospect company. After that conversation, they bought our tool right away. So, what kind of attribution are you going to do on it?" And he thought he got me. He thought he had me in the corner, right? And I said, "Can you scale that? Can marketing team put more people on the right plane so you can talk to more people and sell more stuff?" And then he got thinking, right? Like, think how many things you're running. And if everything translated into something measurable one to one, it would be an easy game, but we're no longer in the easy game world, right? It's just you don't know what you're looking for until you have a lot of data and you start seeing trends. And that's where that comparison to a compass comes in. But I'm very much aligned to how you think about it because what's the alternative is to track nothing. And then you go and just tell your leadership, just trust me on this one. Just trust me. And it can only take you so far.
Yeah, no, it's spot on. I mean, you have to build trust with that team. They're giving you investment, they're giving you dollars, you're trying to build scale. Of course, there's a million little one-offs like that. That's a fantastic story. Like I'm glad that that person closed that account. But yeah, as a strategic initiative for the quarter, what are you going to be doing, and how can you better spend this year than you did last year? I think that's really what you're trying to do is just build incremental improvements. And so yeah, that's a great antidote. Um, so let's get into like the best principles for actually having a solid foundation because everything is going to be built on that. If you don't have a great data layer across your CRMs, your marketing ops, your website tracking, your ad platforms, then it doesn't matter what tools you have. Like the data is going to be off anyway. So even if you had a data science team that was running SQL and Tableau dashboards off of it, um, it's still going to be inaccurate if you don't have a good foundation. So everything starts with that foundation. So I would recommend, you know, investing in your operations teams, investing in your analytics teams. Don't try to cut corners on those teams because those are very, very important. I do have a link to a full spreadsheet that has, I think, about 50 touch point rows of what I would do in terms of setting up your foundation. But really, what it goes through is just at the top level, like before you even get into anything, understand what your KPIs are. Talk about defining lead stages, and we'll kind of go through that. Talk about what your data structure is. Do you have a UTM governance trackable sheet? How do you want to set up your CRM and your campaign, operations? And then just having consistent checks and alerts set up. I think one thing that I remember setting up was things break sometimes. Sometimes your forms break, sometimes tracking breaks. And so having something where if they see a drastic spike in a delta daily or week over week, triggering that to the team to just go in and QA something because that will inevitably happen. But the other things that I think about again is setting up that like initial understanding between teams. So how are we going to measure the funnel? Yes, we know that it's not always linear, but we know when accounts have been reached, or we know when we can track that somebody has engaged with our content or our brand. We know when somebody's filled out hand raiser form to meet with the team. We know when somebody's had an opportunity versus not. So we want to know, how many people have made it through those points in their journey, and so that we can then optimize how to move them further along better. We also want to understand what is our SLA with our sales team, what is our statuses, so we know that, is marketing talking to this contact or this account, or is it on sales to talk to this person? Are they within that, SLA period? Are they moving it back to nurture so that marketing can continue to add them to programs to keep the brand top of mind? Or is it in sales hands so that they can actually communicate with that client or that prospect? So that's like really, really important foundations, because again, if you don't have this, how can you have a cohesive conversation about your performance going forward? And so, uh, fundamentally, I always think about it the what and the how. I mean, in every story, in every dashboard, or in every performance update, you're going to say, "Hey, how much of the what have we been able to get our accounts or get our prospects to do? What are they doing? And how?" On the right hand side, how do we get them to go do that action? So when they say, "Hey, we need more demo forms," okay, yeah, everybody would love more hand raisers for a demo of their product. We want to understand how did that happen, and I think the importance call out here is that in some cases, sometimes I see clients mixing up lead sources with the what. So they will say the lead source is the webinar, or the lead source is a white paper. That's not a lead source. That's a content type. That's what they did. The source is how did you get them to go do that action.
Eric, we have a question on something that you covered in this section, and I would love to address it now so that we don't kind of, get along further down the road. And the question is this: I love the one team, one dream comment. Would love to know if you have any pointers on how to cultivate this sentiment. I've heard personally and from others of GTM organizations with a high percentage of pipeline driven by marketing that they're struggling to get alignment with sales to scale up. So what are your thoughts on this? How do you drive the culture of one team, one dream? And most likely would have to come from probably the marketing side and then embraced across.
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with, and honestly, it starts with the partnership of your head of marketing and your head of sales to be on the same page. But usually, where I get a lot of buy-in is if you have an SDR team, like what that handoff looks like is one initial program. Like when I did an ABM pilot program at Atlassian, we started out with a small cohort of SDRs, and we just basically built that trust of, hey, our goal as marketing is that you as sales can help, hit your number, or help, reach these number of accounts or close these number of deals. So let's just, let's scrap all sorts of, lanes or credit, and let's just work together. And how are we going to get to that goal at the end of the day? And so that was like us giving them insights into accounts, insights into different behaviors, or news about those accounts, helping them like write write sequences for outbound, helping them warm up the accounts, getting feedback on uh, different messaging. So it's more of like building that type of culture, and then like celebrating wins together. And so I think having the SDRs say like, "Oh my God, thank you so much for giving me this insights," or hey, that person that just downloaded that calculator tool that marketing built like ended up closing. So I think for that, it's just highlighting those stories together. And for me, it's been more around um, just trying to get away from people arguing over like that was an outbound versus an inbound. I think when things are so binary, it gets a little bit complicated because things aren't binary. So yeah, I think that would hopefully I addressed that question to what you're looking for, but those are some of my thoughts.
I had great success working with BDRs, and I actually have the why behind it. So usually those are the people earlier in their career. And if marketing takes them under their wing, whether it's the demand gen person or the person who runs campaigns, right? And you feed them information that you on the marketing side see all the time because you are in those systems every day. You are watching things, right? You're creating segments, audiences. So you go and give it to them. And they know how hard it is to pound the pavement. They know how hard it is to knock on doors, right? And out of a sudden, they have this pipeline that feeds into their prospecting, so they become your best friend. And what they do then, they go and advocate on your behalf to the sales team, to the AEs that they're assigned to. Hey, I saw this account, marketing sent it to me. This is what they saw. And I talked to such and such. And what do you know? They're ready to meet, right? So that's like that bottoms up exercise. I think it works fantastic. You just got to give these people time, because usually if you're not talking to the SDR team or BDR team, they're not sitting on your team. You may not naturally be inclined to do that. But passing that intel from all the systems that you see is super helpful. And then on my end, if you want to comment on this, I would be curious on your take. If you create a framework where everybody looks up to the same North Star metric, and usually it's revenue, but you got to be careful with that, because usually how it happens at the sales kickoff, the business leader goes, we are here to drive $50 million this year. Can I get a hooray? Hooray. Everybody goes home to drive $50 million, right? And then you bring the graphic designer or the content marketer, to the next team meeting, like, hey, how are you going to drive $50 million? I watched that person. They're like, I don't know. I write copy, right? And it kind of breaks that one team is no longer one team, because they don't know how what they do even connects to that top number. But if you create a framework of metrics where each individual person has KPIs, and you call them vanity metrics, I don't really care, but those are metrics that help individual people do their part of the thing. And if you create a framework, and we have it on our website in an article, it's like if you create a framework of metrics all aligning to the big number, that's how you get people to buy in, because everybody understands if I increase my open rate for emails, that means that this conversion rate will translate to something else. Is it hard to do? It is hard to do because it's on the marketing leader. But once you have it, the whole team feels plugged in. So that's kind of my comment on that.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think you touch on a little bit more of also just like buying in the rest of the marketing team to align to that number. And yeah, a revenue number is really, really hard to just break down theoretically with your day-to-day work, because it takes time, especially if a sales cycle is 6, 12 months to like, ultimately see where that paid off. But yeah, I think a big question I get sometimes is working with product marketing teams, content teams. How do I measure how effective my content is? How do I know it's being used, and how can I show that it's driving towards that goal? And so, yeah, you've touched on a few of those metrics, and um, yeah, it's a complicated way, but yeah, breaking that down into a digestible, actionable, week to quarter goal is the way to do it. Let's uh, let's move into like reporting. So for QBRs or monthly reviews, or you're going to a board review, the typical questions you're going to get asked, and how do you address those? So usually there's a current state. How are we doing to our plan to our goal? Really common question that's going to be asked. This would be things like you need to have your general KPIs, your key metrics that you're going to talk about, did you hit them or not? But also have specific examples that highlight that performance. And then, you can basically, I've basically knocked down from that general overview slide, or that general number is then, depending on the business, this is kind of where you may take this to a different direction. Sometimes the business wants to have it broken out by each specific product. If you're a large platform business that has selling different SKUs, you might want to try to see, where did you excel, or where are you behind in a certain product? Where are you by region? Is EMEA versus EMEA performing better, and why? Potentially, you want to show your data by source performance or asset performance. And then I think, again, the most important thing at the bottom there is customer journeys. And I'll talk about what a customer journey looks like, and why that's such an important story to show. Forecasting. Most of the time, you're going to be asked, how do we expect to perform? If you're in the middle of a quarter, where are we going to end up? Or where are we going to end up next quarter based off of our current performance? And so that really comes into, I think I look a lot at conversion rates. So the conversion rates of the leads that we have been giving our sales team, and what are they converting? What are the right combinations that lead to higher conversion rates? And then what's our budget? So how are we going to effectively use that budget going forward? And then I think kind of the third question usually is generally more optimistic, or future thinking. Where should we invest in general? Like, what is our strategy? What are some of our big bets? And so those are where I think a lot of organizations will do like a big rock or a big bet that they'll think about, and then breaking that down into kind of more like blended integrated campaigns, and they kind of roll up into that bigger strategic thinking. And so I think that's one area. And then I think when you get asked that question, well, where should we invest the next $100,000 or next 10K or 500K? That's where it gets a little bit complex because you really need to think about it from an incrementality perspective, not just an optimization perspective. So you can lift, your performance with small incremental changes, but sorry, so small changes to your like direct response campaigns, but you really need to do an incrementality test of like, well, what's the bigger effort if I run a huge brand campaign like this versus I don't do it. So that all said, some examples of slides that feel free to borrow or take inspiration from. A typical, end of quarter slide that I will usually present is on. This is using kind of that lead or contact view. I also have a note that you can also show this on an account view. And so, looking through your general funnel, I think it's important to also let leadership know if this is a cohort snapshot. So are these leads also converting to these MQLs, converting to these SQLs, or is this more of a snapshot view? Whereas at this point in time, this is how many we drove. And I think that's important, especially when it comes to conversion rates, to not mix that up because it, it just causes confusion if you're like, wait, where do these SQLs, do these come from those MQLs or from prior quarters? So that helps the forecasting. But yeah, I think these are all really kind of important metrics to have. Um, Breaking that down by, again, the how versus the what. So, or sorry, the what versus the how. So the what would be what do they do? How is that converting? So I think something that I would definitely highlight here is that conversion rate to opportunity or SQL, depending on how you define it at your organization. You know, Clearly a demo form or a chat that's going to book a time on your sales team's calendar is going to convert higher to an opportunity than a piece of content or a sponsored trade show. And so as you think about if you're just given an MQL goal, that would be silly because you could hit that MQL goal with any number of these paid programs, but they are of different quality. So that's something that you obviously want to highlight and talk about why you're blending that or why you're investing in these different channels. This is the version where I would say you can also absolutely show this by an account. And that's a really, really strong way to do it, especially if you sell into the enterprise, because it's not necessarily you need more people. You just want to make sure you're targeting the right accounts and you're warming them up. And so you want to look at that account conversion rate, not just the people conversion rate. And this is, again, the channel that brought it in and how does that look like? This is another example. Feel free to borrow this chart. I love this chart that I basically show this where it's a daily snapshot of the mid-quarter performance of both opportunities or marketing qualified leads if that's your goal. And I think what it shows is it highlights that like a quarter is not linear, and so when you're in the middle of that weak performance, just to kind of reassure again, we're trying to build confidence with our CFOs, build confidence with our leadership teams that, hey, we're going to hit our target. Hey, I know where we're behind, but look what happened last quarter. We rose back up because we have this event coming up or this webinar coming up, or we're launching a bunch of new ad campaigns and initiatives. And so just reiterating like what that looks like and that pacing looks like is a good chart to show. And then the other thing I would show is going back to those conversion rates. I think highlighting, when the leadership team might just say, well, why don't you just drive more demo forms or just focus on that? Show how that converts to later opportunity stages. And so if you not just are showing opportunity created, but opportunities that have moved to stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, closed won, what are those combinations that lead to a better opportunity? Because aren't we all after trying to go after revenue? As Nadia said, what can we do to drive revenue? And how do you break that down? Well, we don't just want to drive demos. We actually, if we look at the accounts that also went to webinars or also did events or guides or went to our blog, this is where you bring in your product and your content team and say, hey, all that effort that you did to create that content, all these accounts were engaging and looking at that content, and that led to a 3x higher conversion rate that that was a much better prospect for our sales teams, and a much more educated account than if they just had done the demo request. And so examples like that is a great story to show to your team.
Hey, Eric, I got a funny
Yeah.
story here. So you're Ashley Foss, who is currently the lifecycle marketer at Atlassian, who is leading that team. She had a LinkedIn post. She goes, "My best converting channel is DocuSign," right? Back to your point of storytelling. If you do not tell people the what and the how, and you just throw the number out there, like, "Can you get us more DocuSigns?" Well, yeah, it takes a few steps before you get to the DocuSign, but your demo example was fantastic because ultimately, like if you have the buyer's journey and you can tell what happened prior to, I think that's where people start paying attention because you tell them something they have no visibility into. While everybody can look at the numbers, they don't know what the numbers mean and what happened.
Love it. I think another tip that that I would highlight is just again, like splitting out. Not all MQLs are treated equal. I think a lot of times leadership might just say, we want to 3 extra MQLs. How do we do that? And I think just re-educating them, say like, what does that mean? Like, let's just start before you tell us to double or triple our MQLs. Let's go back to what is the opportunity goal or the pipeline goal or the revenue goal, because we can do that more efficiently than just making up a blended MQL goal. Because as I showed you, that could mean anything. I could hit an MQL target very easily if I just changed that definition. And so really just kind of showing on what we ultimately want to achieve as a team, and how we're going to get there is the right way to go. And the other maybe like tip that I would want to convey, maybe more technical, but I find kind of just adding these additional custom fields that maybe aren't in your standard CRM pretty helpful. So making sure you have not only your latest source, but original source. I also like adding an MQL source. So stamping what was that last touch that drove them to do that demo form is really kind of helpful for us to see, because maybe it's that marketing email campaign that we did versus the original source that brought them in. Also break that out by type and campaign type. And then the other thing that I see in organizations that are more advanced is that they have really detailed time stamping in terms of the SLAs. And so they know that a hot hand raised lead, they know the time that it took for it to be sent and assigned to a sales rep to when that sales rep reached out to it. And so they can tell if is our conversion rate down because we're slower to respond to these types of leads versus are we meeting that SLA, and maybe it's another reason why our conversion rates are up or down. So these are just some fields that I would recommend you add. If you're selling the enterprise and you want to run an ABM motion, I would strongly recommend that. I love thinking about this funnel from an account perspective versus a just a contact perspective. And I'll talk through a couple customer stories that highlight why that's an easier story to measure and to show your sales team. So, the main thing is that you're just trying to show progression of a cohort. And the nice thing about that is that you typically will start with a static number of accounts. And so it's easier to measure the penetration rate of your total addressable market. And so if you have, for example, this is a standard Salesforce dashboard. If you have a standard set of accounts, perhaps there's 2,800 target accounts that you're trying to warm up, you can then show in Salesforce, well, we've been able to reach 1,800 of them with some sort of campaigns. We've gotten, let's say this is like, we just reached anybody with email campaigns. We were able to get 580 people to actually engage, download, attend, respond to something, and actually engage with our marketing assets. And then showing opportunities, stage 2 opportunities, and then week over week trends. I think something like that is a really nice snapshot to show over time and show that improvement of that rate, as you guys do a combination of activities. The other story I would highlight is just showing the very long journeys and the multiple touch points that it takes for a company to ultimately become an opportunity. So in this example, if we look at a report in Salesforce that shows campaign member touch points. Again, we're tracking touch points with a campaign object. You would say, hey, it's not just an inbound or an outbound. It's not just one demo request that caused this, marketing sourced opportunity. This is a journey of 17 different people at this company who are engaging with content. Where they went to webinars, content syndication, marketing, emails, outbound, sponsor webinars. Like, this is the type of complexity that buyer journeys are taking. And so I think this is usually a little bit of an eye-opening experience for some revenue leaders when they're like, oh, we didn't have insight into this. We didn't know that's what was happening. And furthermore, you can also show how you might have missed some actual effective marketing spend or an effective marketing event if you were just looking at it from a contact perspective versus an account perspective. So in this example, you might have invested in a trade show or invested in this, yeah, in this sponsorship of this event, where you got a CFO at an account to actually attend and engage with your brand there. However, that CFO was not the same person that booked the demo. It was not the same person that, went to the website. So how do you connect those dots? Because there's another person at that account that actually probably heard about your brand from this event. The CFO told that person to go check out the brand. They went to the website, they booked the demo. So, if we measured that by a contact perspective, that event would get zero credit. But if you look at it from an account perspective, oh, we have these multiple touch points and we're showing that story going forward. So I would definitely be an advocate for showing this. Some other examples and slides that please, take away as you will. We obviously want to do a deeper dive into paid search. That gets asked a lot, to just go into specific channels, and so you want to highlight if it's paid search, if it's paid social. What is your actual direct response campaigns? And so this is something where you do need to be pretty sophisticated, and you need to have a good answer for your CFO, if you're spending money on paid channels, to know what that ROI is. And so we look at that on a cost per opportunity, a conversion rate perspective. You should be able to have this all set up through your UTM tracking, through your ad conversion tracking, through your HubSpot ad platform connections. There's many ways to do this, but I would use this as a template. And on a smaller scale, this is a good example of just a pretty easy, lightweight test of, hey, let's put out a piece of content, a master class. Let's spend some initial budget and measure if we can actually capture our target market with a piece of content. Okay, we did. We were able to get founders and COOs is what we wanted. So we got 13 of those at a cost of $138 per lead. And then ultimately, did that cohort, what percentage of that cohort turned into an opportunity? And what was that opportunity worth? I mean, this is a simplified version. You can imagine this at scale of a number of different campaigns, but these are the stories. These are what you need to show is what's working and what's not working, and how can you test and improve those rates. And so in conclusion, I guess we're getting there. I would say that the most advanced, types of organizations, the largest organizations that I've worked with, they will have dedicated teams to data analytics, attribution. They're building their own models, I would say, using APIs and processes. That's what we had at Atlassian after I know a number of years. Once we got to that point, that was fantastic support for marketing to have, but it was still based on a lot of the principles that we just talked about. It was just adding more power to understanding more models, but it was based off of the same touch points. I think we also see, different types of models and, um, MMM models as well, for that. Whereas I think on the beginning side of it, you're going to probably be a little bit more fragmented, tracking in spreadsheets. Nothing wrong with that to get started, but I would definitely recommend a more automated and standardized system going forward. And just to remember that as you go on this journey of advocating and internally marketing your marketing team, treat attribution as just a more of a compass. Like we said, don't try to put exact dollars behind every single touch point, I think that gets really, really tricky. I would say that align on that revenue or that pipeline shared KPI with sales and finance. Show those customer stories. So show how multiple touch points led to that deal, not just one. Have really clean, clear UTM governance. Have a really clear guide to measuring brand. So don't not do brand because it's harder to measure. Please do brand marketing. It's going to elevate the rest of your performance and just show that lift with various types of testing. Um, and yeah, basically just advocate and experiment and really have a good time advocating for your marketing team because it's really, really important. And I think that the worst thing I see is when leadership doesn't know what marketing's doing or doesn't know the effectiveness of it because it's a lot of work, believe me. Um, and that's all I have, Nadia. Yeah, any thoughts or questions that you could think about?
I think we can take questions if anyone has questions. I actually have a couple for you. Um, you had the slide where you were talking about a webinar and kind of the breakdown on what things cost per lead to kind of help people understand that. And I personally have experienced this scenario multiple times where you go to ask for budget for something. Maybe it's even your yearly budget. You're just showing all these things to your superiors saying, hey, these contracts are coming. And they start looking at it line by line, splitting hair. What's this? What do we get for that? What's the program? Well, how much is the reach? And you realize that it all kind of gets boiled down to a very simplistic math exercise to get you approval for that program that you know will do so much more. For example, you do something with a third party, right? They guarantee you so many things, so many leads, so many registrations, so many attendances. And you communicate that to your CFO or whoever, right? And they start doing that math in their head. Okay, 1,000 people guaranteed, half will show up. This is how much we're paying. This is what we're paying per lead. How many opportunities will we get out of it? You will get absolutely no opportunities out of it the minute it concludes. I guarantee you that. Does that mean that we're not doing it? But the way I always kind of communicated that, and it worked sometimes, sometimes it didn't, is you remind people of the bigger kind of picture. Like, what are we ultimately trying to do? Do you want more people to know about us? Do you want to reach people that are outside of our network? Then we have to do these things because there's no other way we can reach those people. But I'm curious if you talk to anyone who kind of experienced the same gravitas toward demand generation and pipeline related things, oversimplifying, like not even explaining the buyer's journey and the importance of those touch points in the bigger picture, but rather focusing on like what's the immediate output.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like setting the expectations of that immediacy versus that longer point of view and that strategy because yeah sometimes sales leaders and CEOs they do want that immediate output. If I give you this budget for that third party program, I want opportunities right away. And um, obviously I would like to measure everything on that performance of opportunities generated in pipeline. But things take time. The other thing I would say is that um, just on the metric side of it, sometimes I've seen where they do that mental math and they'll say like, okay, well, like cost per lead or even like cost per impression. Sometimes I'll see them get hung up on that. And you're trying to reiterate like what the North Star is. And so they'll say like, well, it's cheaper for us to, go with this program because we can reach more people at a lower cost versus this program. But then you have to come back to the point of wait, like we're not in the business of just like trying to find the cheapest way to reach people. Like we're in the business of are those the right people to reach? Are those the right people to influence? Are those the right programs that are ultimately going to lead to, new logos and new pipeline down the road? And so I think it's going back to just like aligning on timeline, aligning on like the goal of the program. Is this a brand building or a demand creation exercise or an ICP expansion exercise versus is this a direct response campaign where we're trying to generate net new demos immediately because there's an offer here. So yeah, it's it's just a conversation that has to be clarified, in my experience.
And I feel like sometimes the conversion rates are the most important metric. Like, we talk about many other things, but to tell that story, like you have to be able to articulate freely what those conversions are. And you hit on that talking about the cohort versus historical from the beginning of the year, right? And I feel like that's one of the hardest metrics to measure because, again, if you don't have automation, and that's to me, like that's the superpower that you can have as a marketing leader to have that go to a view and it shows you how things are converting. And you can look at conversions within the sales cycle, conversions outside of the sales cycle. So you can set those expectations. What will this webinar get us? Nothing in the next 90 days because that's the length of the sales cycle. But we will come back and address it 100 days from now because that's when we will know if this had any impact. Do people think about funnels? Do people think about conversions within the funnel, or are they just on the bandwagon of funnel is dead? We're looking for the next shiny thing.
I think it depends on where the organization is and what their maturity is. I think that funnels are easier to measure and understand. I think that there's also, loops and ways to think about different models of that. But I think ultimately you need to warm up a cohort and warm up an audience before they can close. And so the more the more reach and the more touch points that you can show will ultimately lead to that repeatable and slightly more predictable success metric than not. And so most of the reporting I still see is in funnels in stages.
That's good to know. I will make one last comment that I have. Next week we're gonna have Franz Riemersma with Martech Tribe. And when I was talking to him, like, prepping for the session, we kind of settled on this notion where tools do a great job showing you many things, but you cannot replace strategy with any of the tools. You cannot replace strategy with agentic workflows. We cannot replace strategy with AI and everything else that's out there. But sometimes people gravitate to the easy button because, again, they focus on the data that they cannot get because they think that's where the answer is if they want the data to tell them the answer, right? And data will never tell you the answer. It cannot replace strategy. So if there was one thing that I took from your presentation today is that you still got to have strategy.
Absolutely. Um, I think I see another question that came in. This one says, our organization wants to view attribution across all go-to-market channels, not just marketing in a silo. How do you recommend balancing the attribution across such diverse touch points, such as an AE logs emails versus a booth scan at an event versus a deal registration, etc.? Um, I think this is it's the same approach as we've been talking about. I think the touch points that I was listing on those slides were marketing touch points, but um, there's kind of two on here that there's a couple on here that maybe I didn't list. So an AE log email or an outbound email. I also would use a Salesforce campaign object for that. And so, for example, a lot of these tools like Outreach or other outbound sequencer tools, they integrate with Salesforce. And so if a contact is enrolled in one of those outbound motions, it should just automatically add that person as a member to that outbound campaign. And that way we know the date that somebody has been outbounded to and what the ultimate response was. So the member status would be like sent, and there's that date. And then, ultimately, if there was a response, there's a response. Still, again, keeping in line with that lead stage that you and your sales team have aligned on. So we know, like, okay, what stage are they in? Are they being worked? Are they now an opportunity? And I think where I've seen that is, again, that account journey map. So like you might see a bunch of outbound emails go to this account or a variety of people at that account, but there was no response. Or you might see then there was a gap. Then we marketing kind of picked up that account and we started inviting them to a bunch of different assets and content or a round table. And then maybe later they responded back to that outbound, or they then were put into more outbound sequences. I think it's just more showing the timing and the cause and effect. Or um, we can show that if we actually warmed up those accounts and then they were put into those outbound sequences, those have a higher response rate than the other cohort. So um, I still think it's important to track a touch point like that. Same thing with the boost scan. I mean, that would just come in as an event. Um, I think emails, like marketing emails, I don't like tracking those. Like at least the marketing like sent emails seem to be like too noisy of a signal for me. I don't think it's much correlation to like uh, awareness, especially with some of the marketing tracking issues that we're seeing. Instead, I like if you did drive somebody from a marketing email to actually go to an asset or a website page, then I track that as a marketing touch point from a marketing email. So just a couple of thoughts on that.
That's actually the story of how I ended up coming to CaliberMind, because I came from the client side, right? And the idea was that we wanted to track everything, the salespeople activity and the marketing activity within the same buyer's journey. So you could show this is what happened pre-opportunity, this is what happened after the opportunity got open, how much things got accelerated, driving the notion that when there's outbound, things close faster because BDR is set on the marketing team, right? So our CMO had a very, very particular point of view on marketing emails because we had Marketo. And in Salesforce, we had the sales insights, right? So you would have the Marketo activities going for miles and miles and miles. And head of sales, he came to one of the QBRs really angry. You tell my people to look at that activity and it just goes for miles. How am I supposed to look at it? Like, nobody talked about exporting, putting it into ChatGPT for summaries. He was just annoyed that there's so much noise. So we had to remove the marketing email touch points from that journey to give people a clearer view. So, I mean, again, that goes back to like that custom modeling and ability to parse through that large, portion of data that you're dealing with. And sometimes you get to the point where manually you either go through your BI team or marketing analytics team, and then you sometimes might run up against ticketing. Open a ticket, they do something, then you go back and tell them, hey, I looked at what you did. This doesn't match. Can you go back? Versus, getting a tool, right? We went the tool route because our BI team was like up to their eyeballs in tasks from other parts of the business. But it's funny that you said that. I just had a deja vu moment.
The noise of marketing emails, yes, those can take up a lot of activity, but um, yeah, I think tracking a sales touch is still just as important as a marketing touch. I think you just like sometimes that motion gets skipped. Like I have an organization right now that doesn't track the sales outreaches, and I'm like, well, how do we know who's been outbounded to or not? Like we need to measure, what that cause and effect is, and not just only see it once it becomes an opportunity because you miss all this valuable pre-opportunity, um, activity that we can then basically use to forecast to do that better. So
And
um,
where's your one team, one dream, where you're only looking at marketing under the microscope? Where's that one team, one dream when you're not tracking half of what's happening in the go-to-market motion?
exactly. Um,
All right, let's see if
yeah,
any other questions. If you guys have anything else you want to add, feel free to do that. No, if not, then maybe this is a wrap. Eric, thank you so much. This was amazing. I love hearing kind of other takes on trying to get to the same end result because I think at the end of the day, attribution is just one of the answers to marketing questions, but it's just having all the data and knowing what to do with it so that you can articulate what the heck you are doing day in and day out for other people to pay attention.
exactly. Well, yeah, I had a great time. Thank you so much for having me on and for speaking today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Mary, we'll turn that over to you to tee up the next session next week.
All right. Thank you so much to you both. Oh, sorry. Tried to bring you back on, Nadia. Yeah, real quick before we go, I would love to just share a quick teaser of what we have going on next week. We have a double header next week, and I'll move myself so you can actually see it. So we have Franz Reimers. Sorry, Franz. We have Franz from Martech. He and Scott Brinker have put out so much great research, and I think he has tons of insight on what it's like to buy software, how to do it well, from all their all their research on the landscape of Martech software. So I think that'll be a really awesome session to join. Just as a note, both of these sessions are not on our typical Wednesday. We have Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern and Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Then Amanda Landsaw with Endeavor B2B, she'll be talking about what to expect when leadership is expecting. I think similar vein to this session. So if you enjoyed this, highly recommend joining that one as well. Yeah, that's all, folks. And don't forget, it's mostly harmless data.